Folks, it is finally here. We did it. It's finally autumn. Congratulations, you made it. Much better. In fact, on the day of filming this, it is actually autumn equinox. It's the first day of autumn. And it is delightfully chilly and gloomy outside, which I think is the perfect opportunity to do a warm and cozy sewing activity. So today I'm going to be making a really cute and simple apron. And I have 2 meters of a linen cotton blend here that I actually bought for another project and I never got around to it. And I'm unlikely to get around to it, so I figured it was the perfect opportunity to use it up. I do a lot of baking in the fall. I've already done some baking and I have a really bad habit of wiping my hands on my pants. So now I won't have to do that. I can wipe my hands on the apron and it will be machine washable because it's just linen cotton. So that's perfect. So let's get started with making this apron.
To begin, here are the pattern pieces you'll need to cut out. 1 skirt piece to your desired length and twice as wide as your waist measurement. I chose for mine to be about knee length plus some extra for seam allowance. The sides of the apron can be hemmed in ahead of time and I left the bottom edge raw for now. 2 waistband pieces cut out as separates, i.e. not on the fold. I cut mine super long, the full 2 meter length of the fabric, because I wanted the ends to hang down and look cute when they were tied. I cut my strips too wide at first, but eventually I opted for a 1 inch wide waistband with half an inch of seam allowance, so I later trimmed them down to 2 2-inch strips. 2 strap pieces cut on the fold. For a 1 inch wide strap, you'll need to cut out a 2.5 inch piece. I cut mine to be 30 inches long, but the finished straps were about 26 inches long, and even that might have been a bit much. 2 ruffle pieces cut on the fold. You can use a single layer instead and finish the edge rather than folding it, but I love how ruffles look when they're 2 layers thick. It makes the edge of the ruffle look really clean. I cut mine to be 6 inches wide, so I'd have about a 3 inch wide finished ruffle. My ruffle strips were also about 40 inches long. For a denser ruffle, cut out a longer piece and gather it up more. Finally, you'll need 1 bib piece, cut on the fold at the bottom edge. I used an 8.5 by 11 piece of printer paper for my pattern and just added some seam allowance to it. Looking back, you absolutely don't have to cut this piece out on the fold, and it may even be easier to cut it out as separates. With all the pieces cut out, assembly can begin. I started with the ruffles along the apron front. I folded the fabric in half so that the ruffle would have a nice neat edge. My preferred method for ruffles is to gather the fabric directly at my machine by increasing the tension and stitch length as high as they'll go. This doesn't give as much control over the density or length of the ruffles, but I like the way it looks a lot, and I find gathering fabric by hand to be a nuisance because my threads are always breaking. I wanted the ends of the ruffles to round out and taper to a point, so close to each end, I directed my fabric towards the opposite side so that it would form a little point. I also backstitched at each end. If you're gathering by hand, don't backstitch. To add the straps to the bib front, I pinned them at a slight angle so they could cross over easier in the back, but looking at the footage, I think I might have pinned them at the wrong angle. If I were to redo this project, I probably would just pin them on straight, or not even add them at this point, which I'll discuss later. However, if you add your straps now, make sure to only sew them halfway so that they can be folded over the ruffles later. Once the straps were sewn on, I could add the ruffles. I trimmed the seam allowance at the tapered ends, then pinned the ruffles to the bib and straps with the raw edges lined up. I started pinning the ruffle about an inch above the waist point of the bib and continued along up the straps. Then I folded the straps twice over the raw edges and pinned and top stitched them down. Okay, I've run into a few snags, but I can tell you now a better way to do what I've done. So I think it would be easiest to just sew the ruffle directly to the front of the apron first, like we did, but not attach the straps first. And then you could just top stitch the straps over top of the ruffle and have it extend a little bit into where the bib will be, taking care to fold down the seam allowance first. And then once all that is done, you could fold this up and just actually, if you fold it up like with right sides together, then the sides will be finished and everything will be all tucked in neatly, and then you can just kind of top stitch the top. So that would have been easier. That is not what I did, but that's kind of how I've seam ripped everything apart and what we're doing now. So I'm just making sure that when I pin these straps over, I'm just leaving the raw edge extended, and the apron front will cover that later. So I'm going to take this over to my machine now and top stitch these straps in place, and then I have to kind of reassemble this a little bit. I had to unpick it to fix some wonky seams. Then I can fold up the apron and we'll be back on track. With the ruffles and straps finally sewn on, I made sure everything was tucked in neatly and folded the other half of the bib up. Then I could top stitch along the sides and flip it right side out, which would leave me with nice finished edges along the sides. It's important to note that I didn't completely sew to the top of the bib opening at this point, meaning I left the seam allowances free at the top, so they could be tucked and top stitched later once the bib was flipped right sides out. You can finish the top edge by hand if you don't want a visible line of stitching. With the top done, I could move on to the waistband. I cut the waistband out as 2 strips rather than one that would be folded in half lengthwise to ensure both the apron top and the skirt could be encased within the waistband. I sandwiched the bib between the 2 layers of the waistband, lining up the center fronts for all 3 pieces. Then I pinned along until I got to the end of the bib, but stopped because it was time to determine where the straps would need to meet the waistband. This part was a little tricky. It required a lot of trying the apron on and pinning and repinning the straps. The straps also needed to be pinned with the waistband folded in on itself, not laying out flat, like how it'll lay when it's worn around your 3-dimensional body and not laid out flat on the table, as you can see me doing here. Don't worry, I figured it out eventually. If it's at all helpful, my straps ended up being 24 inches long from the top of the bib to the waistband, and the distance between the bib and the straps along the waistband, i.e. at the bottom of the bib, was 8 inches. I'm sure these aren't universal measurements, but it might at least be a good starting point. Okay, pinning the straps to the right length in the waistband was actually all kinds of complicated, but I think I have got it to the right height now, and all that's left is to gather the skirt and attach it. So easy stuff is left, which is really nice. Also, probably a good idea to not wear red lipstick if you're gonna try on a white apron, because now I have lipstick on my apron. Before sewing the skirt, I ironed the waistband. First ironing the seam allowance to one side, then folding the top layer down and ironing both layers flat. I sewed 2 gathering threads along the top of the skirt and gathered it down to the correct length. I wanted there to be a gap in the back, so I marked where I wanted the skirt to end first, then pinned the skirt between those points, adjusting the gathers to get it to the correct length. Once the skirt had been sewed on, all that was left was to hem the bottom and fold over the waistband and stitch it in place. The tails of the waistband were folded in twice, like how you would fold bias tape, to ensure all the raw edges were contained. I alternated between a slip stitch at the ties and a whip stitch along the bib front. You could also top stitch here, but I like the control I have by finishing by hand. I think I also hemmed the skirt by hand because I was feeling lazy and wanted to sit on my couch rather than at my sewing machine.
Here is the finished apron, and I really love how it turned out. There's a couple things that I would like to maybe fix, like it's a little bit sloppy in some areas. The top stitching on this side for some reason is way too wide, but that's a pretty easy thing to fix. And yeah, other than that, it was really easy to make once I kind of got past the tricky parts. Here's the back. I think that I probably could have made the straps a little bit shorter, but it just kind of does this slouchy thing, which looks just kind of cozy and comfy, so I have no complaints about it. So there we go, one day apron make.
Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video was even a tiny bit helpful. I really love my new apron, and I've worn it a bunch of times since making it. Let me know if you make one of your own, and subscribe for more sewing content. See you next time!